Hello, ladies, gents, and NBs. Welcome back. Tonight we're going to be talking about the LSAT Trainer, a remarkable self study guide for the self driven student by Mike Kim. So, I got a couple of changes going on in my life. Getting tired of the job that I'm doing right now. Plus, I feel like need to be doing more for the working class in general. I mean, as far as organizing, doing my part to advance socialism and communism in the United States and worldwide. So, yeah, and the LSAT is part of that. LSAT is the first step, following in the footsteps of the greats, Lenin, Marx, any of the others that read law, that were training to be lawyers or uh, had become lawyers and left the profession to become revolutionaries. So maybe I'm doing this in reverse, but reading law is one of those steps that needs to be done. But we'll get into this text because I want to read it and study and keep a vlog of this, I think, is the goal. So, all right, we'll get into the introduction. The LSAT is the most significant part of the law school admissions process. It is unique among all of the major American standardized exams in that respect. Your SAT score carried far less weight when you applied for college. And if you were to apply to business school, your GMAT score would also be of far less importance. Furthermore, there is a strong correlation between the law school that you attend and your future career success, much more so than in other fields such as medicine or education. All that is to say that your performance on the LSAT can have a significant impact on the future trajectory of your legal career. In particular, a top LSAT score can open doors for you that would be very difficult to open otherwise. But you already knew all of that. Or if you didn't, you would have soon enough. Whether or not you ever came in contact with the trainer. What you really want from this book is to figure out how to get a top score. Guess what? I have the answer for you. It's not a trick answer, and it's not a gimmick. In fact, it's an answer that you will likely agree with. I'm going to give it to you straight at the end of this first lesson. By the way, I also guarantee you that this first lesson will be the easiest lesson in the book. All it involves is you reading some words and thinking about some ideas. All the other lessons will require you to do work. So find yourself a comfortable chair, sit back, relax, and let's continue. Note, the LSAT is specifically designed to judge your ability to succeed in law school. Keeping in mind what you know about law school classes and being a law student, if it were your job to design the LSAT, how would you design it? More specifically, what are the characteristics of potential law students that you think the LSAT should be designed to test? I guess we'll explore those characteristics in this book. So let's keep reading. The LSAT basics, the test sections. The LSAT is currently being administered in person and online. When you take the official exam, you will sit for 4 sections, but only 3 of the 4 sections will be relevant to your score. The 3 scored sections will include 2 logical reasoning sections and a reading comprehension section. You will also have one experimental section, which will be either an additional logical reasoning or reading comprehension section. The experimental section is used to test questions for future administrations of the LSAT, and your performance on that section does not count towards your score. You are given 35 minutes for each section, and these 4 sections can come in any order. The LSAT also includes a writing component, which is administered separately from the rest of the exam. The essay is not part of your 180 score and carries negligible weight in an admissions process, but it is sent to schools along with your score, so don't write anything immature or potentially stupid. Logical reasoning. Each logical reasoning section will typically contain about 25 questions, which averages out to a little more than a minute 20 per question. Each logical reasoning question consists of a stimulus, which is typically a short 2 or 3 sentence statement, a question stem, which presents the task at hand, and 5 answer choices, one of which will be absolutely correct, and 4 of which will be absolutely incorrect. Your success on the logical reasoning section depends on an equal combination of your reading ability and your reasoning ability. Logical reasoning also requires a significant amount of mental discipline, in large part because the different question stems often present similar yet slightly different tasks. Reading comprehension. The reading comprehension section consists of 4 different passages. Each passage will have between 5 and 8 associated questions, and the section will typically have about 27 questions total. The 4 passages will cover 4 different subject areas: law, history, science, and social science, 1 passage per general subject. You don't need to have any prior knowledge of the subjects discussed in the passages. Certain questions require a general understanding of the passage, and others require a detailed understanding of specific components. But taken as a whole, reading comprehension questions are designed to test your ability to read for reasoning structure. All right, let's look at a sample logical reasoning question. Although the charter of Westdale School states that the student body must include some students with special education needs, no students with learning disabilities have yet enrolled in the school. Therefore, the school is currently in violation of its charter. The conclusion of the argument follows logically if which one of the following is assumed? A. All students with learning disabilities have special education needs. B. The school currently has no student with learning disability. C. The school should enroll students with special education needs. D. The only students with special education needs are students with learning disabilities. E. The school's charter cannot be modified in order to avoid its violated, and in order to its being violated. Right, so the question is that the student body must contain some students with special education needs. No students with learning disabilities have yet enrolled in the school. Therefore, the school is currently in violation of its charter. Well, we'll see if I'm a dumbass in that I'm already on the wrong track with trying to take the LSAT, but I think that the logical answer is D. The only students with special education needs are students with learning disabilities. Um, that would fit the logical assumption that therefore the school is currently in violation of its charter. All logical reasoning questions have a stimulus, as question stem, and 5 answer choices, one of which will be correct. Most stimuli involve arguments, reasons given to justify a point. Depending on how you count them, there are about 16 common varieties of question stems. They are all related but unique in their own ways. For this question, we are looking for an answer that allows the conclusion to follow logically. To follow logically is a big deal on the LSAT. We need an answer that, when added to the argument, guarantees that the support given leads us to the conclusion reached. The author's point is that the school is in violation of its charter. The reason he gives: the charter states that the student body must include some students with special education needs, and no students with learning disabilities have yet enrolled in the school. The author has made a flaw of reasoning here. He has assumed that those with learning disabilities are the only ones with special needs. It could be that students have special needs for other reasons. In order for this argument to work, we need to know that those with learning disabilities are the only ones with special education needs. The answer choice D gives us that information. Therefore, D is correct. No other answer choice gives us the information we need to guarantee the author's conclusion. Well, it looks like I might have a future in law after all. So this question is a question from a previous administered LSAT. And so I've notated it here where it was from, as I will all official LSAT questions we will use in this book. The notation from the question means the question is from Prep Test 34, Section 2, and it is question 10. How is the LSAT scored? The 3 scored sections will typically contain a total of approximately 75 questions. The LSAT is scored using a simple system that tallies up the number of lessons you got right, the number of questions you got right, your raw score, and compares that with how other people perform on the same exam. Or to be more specific, compares that with a prediction of how other people will perform on the same exam, a prediction based on data from experimental sections of previously administered exams. How you do relative to others then determines your overall score on the 120 to 180 scale. There is no scoring difference between getting questions wrong or leaving them blank, and each question is worth the same amount. The raw score to scaled score conversion rates are slightly different from exam to exam. Over time, however, the scoring scales and the exam itself have stayed remarkably consistent. The consistency of the exam is a testament, one of many, to its fine quality. And the scale that they gave here is percentile breakdown of 99.9% 180, 99.5% 175, 97.5% 170, 92% 165, 80% 160, 44% 150, 13.5% 140, 2% 130. I calculated out based on my GPA from graduating from Ferris that in order to get a decent to good chance, a fair chance to a good chance of getting uh, admitted into the MSU University of Law program or College of Law program. I need to score between 160 and 165. That means I need to be at least in the top 80th percentile to 90 percentile to get into the school that I want. So I got my work cut out for me. I need to be studying hard. So we're gonna be making these videos. I'm gonna be making these videos for you guys to study along with me. But yeah, I'm gonna be studying. I'm gonna be studying pretty much every day for the next 3 months until June, when when the time to take the LSAT comes around. And then, yeah, as soon as I get that score, I need to be applying. I need to be putting my name on that fucking piece of paper saying MSU, get my ass in a seat over there because I'm going to be learning law. How effective are traditional study methods? Not very. You need to be able to read and you need to be able to understand what you read and you need to be able to reason logically. You have to be able to use your brain. This is a profession that requires brain power. So, how effective are traditional study methods? Not very. The numbers speak for themselves. The common study methods have not been particularly effective for most people. Taking a course or using a guide does not, in and of itself, raise scores significantly over the average, even though that average includes a large number of people who choose to do nothing at all to prepare for the exam. So, all of this could be a waste of time, but it's still a fun effort. Still, the fact that most students do not improve significantly does not mean that there aren't some students who do figure out how to improve significantly. These are the students who get the high scores. The emperor wears no clothes. In order to improve at the LSAT, it's important to know that you shouldn't study how most other people study. All statistics in this book are based on information published by LSAC. And let's see here. LSAC is the Law School Admission Council. And it can be found at lsac.org. lsac.org. The numbers here represent test takers from 2010 to 2011 academic year. So the average scores for people who don't prepare at all, 148.44. The average test taker, I'm assuming that they also mean that people who study for tests with using traditional study methods, 151.11. People who used a prep book, probably one of the several different prep books that are published, 152.15. People who take a course, I'm assuming that it's like a tutored course, 152.54. And that probably, like, is because they get drilled by their instructor, which could be effective. I mean, drilling, it is a tried and true way to train people, whether for combat or the LSAT, apparently. So, but what this means is that people who didn't prepare at all for the LSAT got an average score of 148.44, and people who uh, drilled with an instructor got an average score of 152.54. Not a, yeah, like he's saying, Mike Kim here, not a significant increase from people who don't prepare to people who feel like they might have over prepared. So, what is the LSAT designed to test? The LSAT is designed to gauge your ability to succeed as a law student. What do law students have to do? First of all, law students have to read a lot of very dense text. Sometimes they have to read and critically evaluate cases that are hundreds of years old. Typically, the key to correctly reading these passages as law student is not the ability to absorb every single detail of everything you read. That would be pointless and impossible, but rather to prioritize the important information that is relevant to your purpose. Secondly, law students have to think about what they read. They have to constantly think about how ideas relate to one another. And that's where Marxism, kind of teaches us how to think dialectically, but also, how things relate to each other materially. And that's very important, especially for law. I'm not saying that Marxists have a shoe in on being natural lawyers, but I think that there's certain ways that Marxists tend to think about the world and think about the systems that we inhabit and engage with and the contradictions within them. And yeah, that prepares people to think, and it prepares them to think, like logically, but also in a way that prioritizes information, right? How these ideas relate to each other. Say, for example, how state and federal laws come together, and they have to think about how reasoning leads to a conclusion. For example, whether the evidence provided is enough to convict someone of a crime. The LSAT is designed to test these types of reading and thinking abilities. But of course, the LSAT is a multiple choice, 75 question, standardized exam. So, at its best, it can only test these skills in a very limited and abstract sort of way. The LSAT is thus primarily designed to test four very specific skills, two of which we will think of as reading skills, and two of which we will think of as reasoning skills. Your ability to read for reasoning structure. The reading skill is most consistently tested and rewarded on the LSAT is your ability to read for reasoning structure. Reasoning structure refers to the organization of a passage relative to its purpose. To understand reasoning structure is to understand why the author has included the various parts of a passage. Your ability to read for reasoning structure will be relevant to the vast majority of logical reasoning questions, and it will also be the primary skill that is tested by the reading comprehension section. Your understanding of certain words. Of course, a necessary and integral part of one's reading ability is an expansive and correct vocabulary. Words have meaning. People don't get to make up their own definitions to words. There are set ideas. Like John Locke comes to mind. And when I was in college years ago now, I think the rhetoric teacher that I have, prepared me for some of these types of things by challenging us, for one, in this class, but also somehow I ended up with the assignment for John Locke. And John Locke was one of those people that analyzed the English language, for one, but part of his rhetoric and philosophy was that words have meaning, and there's a definite kind of, like, there needs to be meanings that are agreed upon throughout society, right? Like, we can't just say that a certain phrase has a meaning for one group and a totally different meaning for another group, even though that might be the case, right? uh, I mean, I can think of several examples off the top of my head. I mean, some of them are slurs, so I won't repeat them here. But in the context of how certain slurs get used, they get used also as, I won't say terms of endearment, but they get used as community signifiers, right? That people in the in community can use them as a greeting or some other type of way to communicate closeness, or maybe, like, to call somebody, like, like motherfucker, but in a way that pulls them in rather than is a derogatory slur, right? Where some of these slurs, definitely depending on your outgroup status, will be taken as a slur. It will be taken offensively by the person that's targeted, and it could result in your physical assault or some other kind of detrimental effect to you, your social standing, maybe your job. uh there's repercussions for, like, the way that words are used, right? But I mean, like, what I'm getting at is words have meaning depending on their in-group context or their out-group context, but also, even in those cases of what I'm describing right now, there is a society-wide agreement on what those terms or what those words mean. So having you know an expansive vocabulary, yes, that's important, but also the correct vocabulary, right? We're talking about correctness here. And the LSAT does test your ability to understand and use certain words. However, they are not the words you might expect. LSAT writers are not particularly interested in testing the sophistication or depth of your vocabulary. They are much more interested in testing your exact understanding of certain commonly used words. You can't make shit up. You can't assign your own definition to a word. You have to understand in the context, in this, your exact understanding of these commonly used words. These words they care about are the words we all use when we create reasoning relationships, like or, only, therefore, must, and unless. Your ability to bring two or three ideas together. One of the two ways in which the test writers will test your reasoning ability is by creating situations in which two or three given statements can, when taken together, yield additional inferences. That is, the exam presents situations in which you have to figure out new things by bringing information together. Didn't we just talk about dialectical reasoning? Get you some Marxism. Or if you're a certified freak, you could probably pick up some Hegel and learn a thing or two about dialectics that way. But read Marx. You'll like it a lot better than Hegel. This skill is necessary for certain logical reasoning questions. Your ability to see why reasons don't justify a conclusion. The flip side of being able to see when two or three ideas come together to form a valid conclusion is being able to see when two or three ideas do not come together to form a particular conclusion. In fact, this ability, the ability to see why reasons given do not justify a conclusion reached, is the key reasoning issue that is tested. This will be central to your success on logical reasoning questions. Sample examples to illustrate issues. Reasoning structure. Why are these two statements different? A. Jane went to college, so she must be a good student. B. Since Jane is a good student, she must have gone to college. Well, one kind of puts one is one may be a non sequitur, right? And that's probably A, because just because Jane went to college doesn't mean she was a good student, right? Any of us who went to college probably have been in class with several bad students. And any of us that have worked on group projects have also felt that pain of working with bad students. So just because someone goes to college does not mean they're a good student. However, since Jane is a good student, she must have gone to college. That also doesn't follow, right? I mean, Jane could have been an excellent student in high school, but she may have never gone to college for various reasons. She probably actually thought that college would be a waste of time for her, so she never went. You never know. But that one also doesn't follow, right? But why are they different? Because one assumes that so one says that Jane went to college, so she must be a good student, but the other says that since she's a good student, she must have gone to college. Like one's putting and one's prioritizing, like her time as a college or her time in college versus her status as a good student. Word beating. What does or mean exactly? A. You can pick a boy puppy or a girl puppy. So in this case, you can pick a boy or a girl puppy. B. To check in at the airport, you must have a driver's license or a passport. You must have one piece of ID. You must have one piece of ID, a driver's license or a passport. Inferences. Every day, Sarah eats either eggs or toast for breakfast. When she eats toast, she always eats jam. Sarah did not eat any jam with her breakfast this morning. What can you infer? Well, when she eats toast, she always eats jam, right? So if she didn't eat any jam, she probably didn't eat any toast. So, therefore, it can be inferred that she did not eat toast at breakfast. Reasoning flaw. Going back to the two examples for reasoning structure, if you wanted to counter both of those statements respectively, what might you say? I've already answered that extensively, so we're not going to go over that again. But yeah, just because Jane was a good student doesn't mean that she's gone to college. Or A, just because Jane went to college doesn't mean that she's a good student. So we could argue that all day long. Let's move on. The 5 mantras of LSAT preparation. When we first start to think about the LSAT and when we begin our studies, there are a lot of reasonable predictions we can make about how it might be designed. It's probably going to reward good reading skills, require attention paid to random details, reward a large vocabulary, require some cleverness or creativity, require mental discipline, all of these predictions are reasonable, but only some of them are actually true. Yeah, we've gone over some of those already, right? Your good reading skills are going to be rewarded. And attention paid to random details, not so much, right? We're looking for details that answer the questions, not random details. Is a large vocabulary rewarded? Also, not necessarily, right? We're looking for the understanding and application, right, of commonly used words. A large vocabulary can help, but not necessarily. Cleverness or creativity? Also, no, not necessarily. Because, like, we're looking, look, the skill set that we're testing here for this ability is the ability to read, right? Your reading comprehension, and the ability to apply that information, and also your logical reasoning ability, the ability to look at the details, and the correct details, right? Not just random details, and then make inferences, or, and here's the, we're talking about, like, what's the definition of or, right? So, or we're looking at how to do the opposite of that inference logically, right? To pick out the incorrect assumption of a state, either a statement or a logical conclusion, or an illogical conclusion, likely. For most LSAT students, it typically takes a lot of studying, a lot of fumbling around, until they can develop some sort of big picture, macro understanding of exactly what the LSAT tests and how it is designed. Most students actually do not get a very clear sense of this until they are near the end of their studies, if they ever get it at all. This puts these students at a huge disadvantage, a disadvantage that virtually guarantees that they will underperform relative to their abilities on test day. For one, it will mean that they invariably waste their study time. That sucks. If you don't know exactly what you need to improve on and why, it's going to take you longer to improve. More importantly, what will happen is that before these students truly understand what type of thinking is rewarded and what type of thinking is not, before they develop proper instincts about the LSAT, they will have already been practicing for the exam for months, and they will have already developed habits based on some vague or perhaps even flawed understanding of the test. This is a fatal issue because habits will, in large part, determine how well you perform on test day, and you cannot change habits simply by learning something new. Most students form their habits before they have the instincts to form good ones. This goes back to training and drills. You want to practice what you're practicing correctly every time. No exceptions. Do it correctly every time. It helps develop a routine. But more importantly, when it comes time for that ability to be tested, when you are under stress and you revert back to your training, you will perform it correctly because that's how you trained, that's how you were drilled. So form your good habits right away, right? That's why we're studying this book first, as opposed to one of the other test books that doesn't necessarily teach you what skills are necessary. It only presents to you the tests, right? Like, I have another book on the way that is an LSAT test book that contains 6 different tests that I can drill on. But if I had the incorrect ideas about what to drill on, if I wasn't drilling correctly, I would form incorrect habits that when tested under stress on test day, I would perform poorly because I've been drilling incorrectly. You can get a huge head start on your competition if you begin your studies with a clear understanding of the exam, and more importantly, if you begin with a clear understanding of exactly how you ought to prepare and what you ought to think about as you study. To that end, I want to begin with 5 short essays that together express what I think is most important for you to consider when you first begin preparing for your exam. These essays discuss what to think about and, more importantly, how to think about these things. The points I make here serve as a summary of much of the wisdom I've gained from working with thousands of students, some of whom drastically improved their scores and some of whom, unfortunately, did not. Since you've had no exposure to the test yet, and that was intentional, that's on purpose, right? We didn't crack open an LSAT test book yet. We're looking at the foundations of the test. Some of you will seem like we are jumping the gun a bit. And it's certainly true that the points I make will ring far truer once you have more LSAT experience under your belt. However, I include these points here so that you can start off with as clear an understanding of your task as possible, so that some of what I mention will serve as a framework that you can use as you organize and prioritize the things we will be learning in future lessons. Drill correctly. Don't drill based on you putting the cart before the horse and getting your hands on the LSAT exam books and jumping headfirst into looking at these exams without understanding what exactly you're studying. Do you understand? Say yes. You understand. Also read Marx. Get yourself some training in dialectics. At least, like, consider that that two things can be true. One of them might be more logical than the other, but it doesn't preclude one from the other, right? But also train yourself on recognizing contradictions and how, like, what's example, like federal and state law. There's bound to be contradictions between federal and state law. Our job as lawyers and our job as Marxists is to parse those contradictions, break them down, and then present a logical conclusion that benefits the working class. That's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to study. That's what we're here to advance. We also have a sidebar here. Oh, these are the solutions of the examples on the previous page. So reasoning structure. In the first argument, the author's point is that Jane must be a good student. Her reasoning is that Jane went to college. In the second argument, the author's point is that Jane must have gone to college. This reasoning is that Jane is a good student. Yeah, we've kind of, I think I actually broke those down in the opposite way, but the inferences were made just in the opposite direction, right? That we kind of talked about, like, well, just because Jane went to college doesn't mean she's a good student, right? But I mean, like, what the author was saying is because she's gone to college, she's a good student. Or because she's a good student, she went to college, right? Fair assumptions. Word meaning. In real life, the meaning of or changes based on the context. In the first example, the or implies exclusivity. In real life, this statement, oh, I see. Okay. I didn't break it down quite this way, but I'm starting to understand now what we're going to talk about when it comes to like a word like or, for example. In the first instance, the or implies exclusivity. In real life, this statement likely means that the person can pick a boy puppy or a girl puppy, but not both, right? So in the second instance, the or does not imply exclusivity. Yeah, this can be logically inferred, right? That when you show up to the airport, you can bring a driver's license or your passport. I mean, you can bring both, but one doesn't exclude the other, right? In real life, you would likely still be able to check in at the airport if you had both a driver's license and a passport. The LSAT requires an absolute rather than contextual understanding of words like or. You need to know how to apply the word or in the sentence. On the LSAT, the or is inclusive, not exclusive, unless otherwise noted. That's important to know. It's a neat little trick right there. So, unless it's explicitly said to be exclusive, you can infer that the word or on the LSAT is inclusive. So, in the case of the driver's license or the passport, it's inclusive, right? You can have either one, you could have both. And you should remember to come back and reread some of these essays later in your studies. Right. So, moving on. 1. Equate smart with simple. We are all used to taking exams based on what we know. This is particularly true in elementary school, junior high school, and high school. For whatever reason, the exams we're given at these levels are almost always designed to test our ability to repeat back the things our teachers have taught us, and at their worst, some are even designed to most reward those students who are best at mimicking the way their teachers think. That is not a good skill. Rote is already kind of questionable, but being tested on your ability to mimic and mirror your instructor, especially at any of those primary or secondary levels, like, no bueno. That doesn't prepare students for anything other than failure once they're out and they have to think for themselves. These experiences shape how we all think about tests and about preparing for tests. A fundamental aspect of this mindset is that we equate knowing more with being more prepared for exams. When it comes to the LSAT, this is a dangerous misconception to have. This mindset tends to have its biggest impact on high achievers, people who are used to succeeding academically by working harder to know more, the rote students. This isn't Jeopardy. You know, we're not picking a category and answering from a question based on our rote memorization, right? We have to think about the answer. And like earlier it said, like that the reward that the questions and the test rewards creativity. Yeah, maybe to a certain extent. I guess like thinking through the problem requires a certain way of constructing in your mind the correct pathway. but not necessarily creativity, right? We're trying to think logically. So yeah, um, you know, we want to paint a picture, but we also want to paint the correct picture, not just based on what we think it is or what it should be or our conception of it, right? So these students are commonly focused on developing as specific and understanding of each type of LSAT question as they possibly can. And these students are commonly drawn to learning systems that are technical and seemingly sophisticated. Let me be clear. You do need to know some things to do well on this exam, of course. And in this book, we will discuss everything you need to know at great and sufficient depth. However, success on the LSAT depends on the quality rather than the quantity of your understanding and your abilities. Success does not favor those who think they will get better by learning 1,000 different details about every type of problem that can appear. It's not rote memorization, right? You're not going to be able to memorize all of those 1,000 little details that could possibly appear anyway. You're going to forget some. You're going to freeze up. You have to be able to recognize a pattern, right? Or you have to be able to like pick out the important information and then use that to your advantage when answering. The LSAT is designed to be a test of how you think, not what you know. The people who write the problems have little interest in gauging your understanding of advanced logical principles, and they have little interest in testing the expanse of your vocabulary. The test writers actually have an obligation to create an exam that does not give an advantage to people of a certain background or life experience. And so they cannot create an exam that rewards, for example, an understanding of formal reasoning that only a philosophy major might have, or the meaning of technical terminology that is unique to a particular scientific field. Like the writers of Seinfeld, Larry David was pretty brilliant, actually. Um, there's a theory that's floated around, and it's also been my kind of theory. You know, I like the way that this theory has developed is that uh, Larry David wrote Seinfeld as a kind of like troll against Jerry Seinfeld, and all the seasons that it ran, was basically like Larry David actually writing his masterpiece joke on Jerry Seinfeld, the butt of the joke, the entire series. So I love Larry David. That's what I'm getting out of that. But the writers of Seinfeld, their job is to create a product that is about nothing in particular. Their job is to create an exam that determines right and wrong based on the most fundamental elements of public human interaction: our ability to understand and organize what we read, and our basic ability to gauge reasoning. That is, our ability to see when the reasoning given justifies a point that is being made and when it doesn't. What most of us think of on a day to day basis as common sense. I don't like to think of it as common sense. I like to think of it as good sense, right? People say, oh, common sense isn't all that common. Yeah. Common sense is, I mean, it is common, actually. What's not common is good sense, right? So I like what the author's saying here. I would use the term good sense. Develop some good sense. Common sense is for the birds. I'm not suggesting that the LSAT is easy. The LSAT is not easy. However, it's important to know that harder questions are generally not more difficult because they test more challenging concepts or require you to know unusual words. Harder questions test exactly the same things easier questions do, but in a more challenging manner. Your job is not to be a master of details, but rather a master of the fundamentals. To that end, I want you to encourage, or I want to encourage you to equate smart with simple when you think of this exam. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS method, right? You know, like there's some wisdom in that too. But that's how we started out this essay, right? The title of it is Equate Smart with Simple. So do that. Do that in your life. Do that in your everyday interactions. I guarantee you it'll make you more likable, for one. Could even improve your relationship with your friends, your coworkers, your spouse. You know, equate smart with simple. Don't complicate things. You complicate things up here. It doesn't make for an easier time. It makes for a harder time. Keep it simple. On a practical level, this means that as you learn new concepts and strategies, and as you practice problems and review them, you want to always work toward attaining as simple and clean and understanding as possible. And you want to get in the habit of equating a simple understanding with a complete one. If you truly know what's wrong with an argument, you shouldn't need an official name or formal language to describe it. You should be able to describe it using your everyday language. If you truly feel comfortable with a type of question, you shouldn't have to remind yourself to keep 10 things in your mind. You should be able to intuitively focus on just two or three fundamental concerns, right? We're not trying to memorize all of the details. We're trying to look at what are the important ones and discern those and make a sound judgment based on what those fundamentals are, right? People say the devil's in the details. Well, we're not, we're not looking for the devil here. We're looking for our better angels. So focus on the 2 to 3 fundamentals. Let the devil dwell in the details. Thinking about the LSAT in a simple way has numerous advantages and will pay off with great effect both in your studies and on test day. And we have more sidebar here. Did you ever get points taken off on a math exam for getting the right answer but not showing your work? I know you have. We all have. We've been there. Or for seeing a different theme in a book than the one your teacher told you to see? Yeah, I've been there too. Or understood the instructions in a different way than what the teacher gave them. I mean, yeah, I've lost points on that too. But that's because they left it too open to interpretation. And I thought that I had the fundamentals, but maybe not so much, right? But the point is, make sure you have a clear understanding and that you can and that you showed your reasoning, right? The LSAT is a test of reading ability and common sense, aka good sense. Inferences. Since Sarah did not eat jam, she must have not eaten toast. Exactly what we talked about in the previous question, right? Since she didn't eat toast in the morning, she must have eaten eggs. Okay, so we didn't answer the question completely. So that might have been points taken off if we were writing this out, right? or if there was a question, a multiple choice question that included the uh, lack of toast, right? That we were concluding that she didn't eat toast. But then there was another answer that concluded that she didn't eat toast, but that she must have eaten eggs. So that's another way to think about these problems, right? Uh, and that's instructive from that answer that was given for the inferences. Reasoning flaw. For the first argument, the author is flawed in assuming that having gone to college ensures that Jane is a good student. Yes, that's why I didn't cover this again, is because I covered that extensively, right? But I didn't cover uh, the original reasoning structure. So that's something that I'm going to have to work on. It's a blind spot that we're recognizing right now, right? That I'm recognizing that I'm going to have to train myself in the correct way when looking at these problems. For the first argument, the author is flawed in assuming that having gone to college ensures that Jane is a good student. Maybe she got into college because of connections, never studied, and didn't do so well. AKA, she was a bad student. We've had, like I said, we've run into several types in our studies, right? For those of us that have gone to college. For the second argument, the author is flawed in assuming that because Jane is a good student, she must have gone to college. And maybe she chose instead to join a startup company. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Just because she was a good student in high school doesn't mean that she decided that college was for her when she graduated. She could have gone in any multiple directions, right? She could be a dancer at the club. She's smart. She's a good student. She also likes to shake her ass and get that money. So, does that mean she's, not a good student? She's probably a great student and a student of life. So, think about that. When you understand things simply, it is far easier to understand what you know. You make it easier on your brain to see how this new thing you're learning is related to everything else you've just learned. And by being better able to relate ideas, you can take your thinking ability to greater depths. In the next few months, we're going to be learning a lot of concepts and developing a lot of strategies. A simple understanding will make it far easier for you to bring together everything you learn. Thinking simply also makes it far easier to utilize your own natural intelligence and real life understanding. When you make your studies more complex and formal, it works as a barrier between you and your mental power. Like I said, your complexity is up here. Unblock it. Keep it simple. And tell your spouse she's pretty, right? Or that he's handsome. Okay? It might seem awkward, but it's a simple way, right? We're looking for simple ways here. So, yeah, don't make it complex and formal. It works against you. Instead of using your own good sense, here we go. Now he's talking. We're using good sense here, right? Instead of using your own good sense to understand a situation, you end up trying to understand a situation in terms of how you understand certain technical terms or abstract concepts. Some LSAT teaching systems even encourage this type of disconnect, but you do not want anything to get in the way of using the talents of your own mind. A simple understanding as opposed to a technical one gives you the best chance to utilize your thinking abilities to their fullest. In my experience, when students are able to do this, most have the natural ability to score at a very high level. And like I said, I need to score at least in the top 80th percentile to get to have a fair chance at getting into MSU College of Law. So I got to train myself here. But I mean, like, I'm kind of a simple guy anyway. I mean, I don't like to make things complex. I like to keep them relatively simple as I can. Um, Finally, a simple understanding will be the one that you can apply best on test day. Human beings are only capable of consciously thinking about one thing at a time. Don't multitask. It doesn't work. Bosses that want you to multitask, just do one thing at a time. Ignore them. Trying to think of 100 things at once does you no good, and an overly complicated understanding will put you in a place where you end up trying to do just that. A simple understanding will help you best apply what you know under pressure. Drill correctly. Don't trust yourself, these books tell you. Think exactly as we tell you. These systems aren't particularly effective. He's making a reference to the test books that try to capture you on technical jargon and complex thinking. Don't think like them. Use good sense. Think simply. Unblock your mind. Meditate. I mean, like, do whatever you need to do to think about the problem in a way that isn't complex, that keeps it simple, that brings you to the correct conclusion, right? That we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're looking at 2, 3 concepts in a question. Remember it. All right, essay 2. Focus on what to think about, not what to think. Right? We're looking at the information in front of us, not on the presupposed structures of whatever we've been taught to think about in our studies. Imagine riding an elephant. You can just sit on top of the animal and choose not to do anything. If so, the elephant will do as it chooses, and you will go along for the ride. But if you have the understanding and motivation, you can train this elephant to do what you would like. You can train it to take you where you want to go, for example, or you can train it to lift heavy things for you. This is of great benefit because, and this is very important, you are not capable of doing the work that the elephant does. The rider who is happiest and wisest is the one who understands how to control the elephant and does not try to do the work himself. You're not going to be able to lift that tree trunk, but that elephant can, right? You're going to strain your muscles and hurt yourself. That elephant can do it, though. Train your mind. The analogy of a rider and an elephant is commonly used in educational circles to discuss the relationship between our conscious mind and our unconscious mind. If you don't control your unconscious, it can drift. If you train it, it can do amazing things for you. This analogy is particularly relevant to how we perform during standardized exams. Our conscious mind is the rider. It gets all the notoriety and attention because it is what we most notice and because it seems to be in control. But once that timer starts, your unconscious, your instincts and habits for what you think about and how takes over. Let's talk more specifically by discussing just one important skill you are going to have to showcase on test day, your ability to evaluate the reasoning in an argument. Most logical reasoning questions require you to evaluate the reasons an author gives in order to justify his or her point, and your success on the entire logical reasoning section hinges in large part on your ability to do this. So, this is going to be a big part of the LSAT. How do you prepare your rider and your elephant to perform at their best? The wrong way to go about it would be to place the burden of the work on the rider. We do this when we try to memorize a list of 50 things that could go wrong with arguments, and we do this when we use tips and tricks, markers, or keywords to make our decisions on a technical or conscious level. We do this when we focus on what we need to know rather than what we need to think about. Right? Let me read that again. We do this when we focus on what we need to know rather than what we need to think about. And of course, we do this when we fail to train our elephant. We're doing the heavy lifting. The elephant should be doing the heavy lifting. Our unconscious should be doing the heavy lifting, right? Our conscious is the trainer. We're the rider, so to say. But we want our unconscious to be doing the heavy lifting, to be doing the heavy work. And it's not so heavy for the elephant, right? It's relative. The tree trunk is impossibly heavy for us. But for the elephant, yeah, it's probably still, like a bit of a strain. But it's not nearly the kind of strain that we would put on ourselves. Think about that. Don't spend your time training your rider. Do not think that by hearing about some clever strategy or memorizing some trick, you can do the heavy lifting needed for success on the LSAT. That's the author. Get these concepts down. Invest your energy into training the elephant and becoming a good rider. You can do this by focusing on what to think about rather than what to think. Right? We're not trying to reinvent things here. We're not trying to, be Hercules. To rip that fucking lion's head off with our bare fucking hands, right? We're not a demigod. We're foot soldier number 512 or whatever, like whatever their fucking names were, Octavius, right? Number 8. We're just out there we have a sword. And we train how to use the sword, right? Just like how we train the elephant. And I like the analogy of the elephant better than, like the Hercules versus soldier, because like the author is getting at that elephant is our unconscious. We're training ourselves what to think. We're training ourselves what to think about rather than simply what to think. because that's what's going to trip you up. By focusing on the decisions to be made rather than the right way to make them, and by making sure you get plenty of experience with the types of situations that you are likely to face on test day. Essay 3: Utilize the power of compound learning. An understanding of addition and subtraction properties is useful and necessary in life, but an understanding of multiplicative properties, when applied properly, is far more valuable. To explain why, I want to start with a simple fable about twin brothers, Wilbur and Wallace. Both Wilbur and Wallace were taught from an early age to save for their retirements. Wilbur loved addition, and Wallace loved multiplication. For the next 60 years that Wilbur worked, he added $1,000 each year to a retirement savings account. At the end of his work years, he retired with $60,000. What a dope, right? So imagine if Wallace, who loved multiplication, put $1,000 into an investment account after his first year of work and never put another dime into that account for the rest of his work years. The account paid him about 10% interest each year, which is roughly what the stock market has paid historically on average until the past few years. But the stock market's a fool's game. Anyway, we should have pensions. We should have pensions that do guarantee payouts, right? Multiplying that $1,000 with 10% growth each year, when he retired in 60 years, Wallace would do so with just a tad over $300,000, right? 60 years is a long ass time to fucking work, though. If you work from 20 to 80, that's also insane, right? We're not we're not looking to live our entire lives at work. My grandpa retired when he was 80, and only because he had dementia, and he went right into a home. So fuck that. Of course, in reality, Wallace had no reason to keep adding $1,000 to his account each year, and so he did while continuing to earn that 10%. And he ended up retiring with a little over $3 million, right? So compare that to Wilbur's 60,000. What drove the expansion of Wallace's wealth? The same thing that allows us to calculate the distance to the stars, the exponential power of multiplication. Side note, if you'd like, you can use these extra wide margins throughout the book to take notes. Well, that's a good tip, right? For us dummies that wouldn't think of shit like that. Oh. All right. The way in which we build our skills is analogous to the way we build up our wealth. And in both endeavors, multiplication is a far more powerful force than addition. Simply put, when we learn by multiplying what we know, by connecting ideas, and by building upon the skills we've already developed, we learn far faster and far more effectively than when we learn in pieces. When we try to learn one thing at a time, and when we try to simply add up the things we learn into some kind of whole. As we make our study plans and as we think about the path that we are going to be taking toward mastery, one of the best things we can do is recognize the value of compound learning. To that end, let's use the Wilbur and Wallace analogy to think about how we can effectively utilize our study time in order to get the maximum return. How would addition loving Wilbur and multiplication loving Wallace think to study for the LSAT? That's a question we'll answer another time. I want to keep moving with this. But I get the feeling that the author probably will answer for us too, so we'll look at what the author writes. So, how to study like Wilbur 1.0 and 2.0. Wilbur 1.0. Okay, here we go. Wilbur 1.0 studies by learning about one question type at a time. He gives himself a certain amount of time to study each type of question, game or passage to the best of his ability, and then moves on to the next. Then a few weeks before the exam, he reviews everything that he's learned. This study situation is a fairly common one, especially among those students who are part of a class and following some sort of class schedule. Almost all classes are designed around a one question type at a time system, and the timing of the classes determines the start and stop of when you study different types of questions. Fair. The consequences of learning like Wilbur 1.0 are mixed. You will definitely get some question specific learning, and over time, you will definitely develop skills that you can apply to a wide range of challenges. On the negative side, you will also have a more difficult time than necessary growing and organizing these skills, and you will make it more difficult on yourself than it needs to be to create sharp and effective instincts. This is like what we talked about with rote. You know, a lot of students get taught a rote way in the classroom, which isn't, you know, the author is pointing out, isn't entirely wrong, but it doesn't set people up for using their mind in ways that would require sharp and effective instincts, right? To illustrate exactly why, imagine that in your first week of studying logical reasoning, you work on identifying conclusion questions, questions that require you to identify the main point the author is trying to make in an argument. And the next week, you study find the assumption questions, questions that require you to figure out what the author is assuming in thinking his or her point is justified. On a conscious level, it's easier for you to keep the two types of questions apart, so you don't think much about studying them one right after another, or you don't think too much about starting your study this way. But remember, the goal of your training is not to prepare your rider, it's to prepare your elephant. What does this sort of preparation do for your elephant? You know, we're it it doesn't exactly teach them how to lift the heavy things, right? It doesn't teach your elephant how to lift the huge rocks or the tree trunks. You know, you're trying to train your elephant by lifting, you know, like bundles of firewood, or you know, maybe rocks that you could even pick up on your own, right? You're not training your elephant correctly. You're not give you're not teaching them to bear the heavy load and burden that you're going to be required, that your elephant is going to be required. You're not bearing the load, the elephant is, right? So, well, in that first week, your elephant is learning to develop ways to think about and solve logical reasoning problems in general. It's also developing specific systems for identifying conclusion questions. Some of that, some of what it learns is relevant to all of logical reasoning, and some of it is specific to the question type. Some of the processes that it starts to habitualize pertain to all logical reasoning questions, and others pertain, again, just to identifying conclusion problems. For the most part, your elephant is left to make most of these determinations on its own. For at the beginning of your studies, even the writer, your conscious mind, doesn't really know how to organize everything you are learning. Now comes the next week and the next type of question, and your elephant has to get used to a similar but slightly different task. It has to learn concepts and strategies that apply to the particular question while reconciling what it is learning with what it learned in the first week. The process continues week after week, new question type after new question type, until the very end of your process, at which point you take a few practice exams and go into your test. Notice the lack of review, the minimal organization, and most importantly, the lack of multiplication. Now you run into an identifying conclusion question on the exam. You have about a minute to arrive at an answer. Will you be able to utilize what you learned back in your first week of studying to get the correct question? Chances are you very well might. The human mind is simply incredible, and it's very possible that you are able in that moment to wade through the months and months of LSAT information you've absorbed in order to find that one particular piece of knowledge that is relevant to the question at hand. But I think you can agree that you haven't made it easy on yourself to get that question correct, and you certainly haven't given yourself the best chance to correctly utilize what you've learned. You're doing the heavy lifting. The elephant should. Wilbur 2.0 studies primarily by doing full sections and entire practice exams. Afterwards, he checks his work and carefully reviews the questions he missed. Wilbur 2.0 gets to a point where each explanation makes 100% complete sense. He understands exactly why he is missing questions. Does this help? Yes, a little bit. But it likely won't lead to significant and fundamental improvement. Even though Wilbur 2.0 knows why he misses questions, every test presents a dozen different issues to study, and the list never seems to end. And what he learns never seems to help on the next exam. It's because every exam is different. Remember the experimental part. That experimental part is part of constructing the next exam for like the next set. By not providing himself with any sort of organizational framework, he limits his ability to grow his skill set to its fullest. How to study like Wallace. Wallace is very interested in growing his understanding, and he knows that strong growth always begins with a solid foundation. So he spends some time thinking about what is most important to success for each of the sections, and he develops a learning schedule that allows him to grow his skills out from this foundation. Of course, I want you to study like Wallace, and to that end, I have carefully designed this training guide to be one that helps you multiply your talents as you develop new skills. Here is what that means more specifically for logical reasoning. Logical reasoning questions present you with a short, typically 2 to 3 sentences scenario, and then ask you to respond to that scenario in some way. Perhaps the author will make a point in the scenario, and your job will be to select the answer that strengthens the point or weakens it. We will begin by investing a great amount of time and energy into the one macro skill that is most important for success on the logical reasoning section: your ability to critically evaluate arguments. A strong majority of LSAT questions hinge on your ability to understand arguments, and more specifically, almost all questions hinge on your ability to see faults in arguments. With that in mind, we will start our training by working at becoming expert at finding faults in arguments. We will study every type of argument flaw that can appear on the exam, and we will break down and practice again and again the process necessary for you to recognize and understand them clearly. We're training the same way correctly every time, no exceptions. You don't drill unless you're doing it correctly. Because when it comes time to kill, if you've been taking pot shots rather than practicing your aim and your breathing, you're going to miss. With that foundation built, we will next move on to develop question-specific strategies, starting first with those questions that most directly ask you about the faulty reasoning. Identify the flaw questions, and gradually panning out to other question types. At each point, we will carefully point out and differentiate the characteristics and issues that are generally relevant to many different types of questions versus those specific to the question type that we are studying. Finally, we will discuss and practice bringing together all the various skills that you have developed so that by the time you go into the test, you will be confident you can represent all of your abilities at their best. For reading comprehension, most of us have some familiarity with reading comprehension from previous standardized exams. Most of us have a general sense of what the reading challenges will be and what the questions will ask for, and so on. Of course, you might expect, and it's important to know, that LSAT reading comprehension test writers do not have a general sense of how to create questions. They have a very specific sense of exactly what it is they are testing, and they have very specific ways of going about it. LSAT passages do not test your knowledge of the world or of history, nor do they test the expanse of your vocabulary. The test makers also care very little for your ability to critically evaluate what you read. In this section, at least, what the test writers care most about is your ability to read for structure, specifically reasoning structure. The majority of questions hinge on this ability. If you are consistently able to see correctly the reasoning structure of passages, you should have great success in reading comprehension. So, we will begin our reading comprehension preparation by building up and strengthening our ability to read for reasoning structure. We will discuss in depth the types of structures you are likely to see on the exam. LSAT passages are very consistent in their structure and get plenty of practice in seeing those structures accurately. Once we've gotten ourselves in the habit of reading passages effectively, we will break down the various types of questions that can be asked of us in this section. We'll relate what we understand about structure to what is being asked of us in each of these questions, and we will work on developing effective problem-solving strategies. Lastly, we will work on bringing it all together for full sections. And the side note here, to wrap this up, an argument consists of a point and reasons given to justify that point. So there you have it. This is part of the introduction still. We're not through the introduction, but we will continue on next time. Thank you all for tuning in. And in this next section, we'll be talking about multiplication trumps addition. So we want to use our elephant as a force multiplier, right? We're not trying to do the lifting ourselves, adding on to our own muscles. We want that elephant to be the force multiplier. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.